We begin today at the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Gimel, right at the beginning of the Yamud. Zok the Heilige Mishnah, Yayin Nesach Aser. Yayin Nesach is Aser. This is what we've been learning here, this entire Masechta. And so when it says a Yayin Nesach, it simply refers to wine that was actually poured for Avoda Zara, but it could also be including any of the wine, Stam Yenim of a Goy, which is Aser Midrabanan. And v'oiser b'chol shehu. This wine that gets mixed into other wines will aser everything else, even if it's just a kol shehu, a tiny drop of this yayin nesach. So when the Mishnah, as I mentioned here, says yayin nesach, Taisus here brings, according to Rabbeinu Tam, yayin nesach in the Mishnah means dafke yayin nesach, literally wine that we know for a fact is asub me'atayra because it was poured for Avoda Zara. But most Rishonim, they'll say that although the Mishnah uses the term yayin nesach, but that includes even the exerim of the Rabbanon of stam yainam, this halacha that it asas b'chol shu applies to that as well. Now, when is this though? The fact that it becomes asas b'chol shu, that's if it's yayin b'yayin, if it's wine, the yayin nesach that's asar, that falls into yayin nesach, or yayin that's mutter. This is the simple pshat of the Mishnah. We'll see in the Gemara, there is a different pshat, but at this point, the simple pshat of the Mishnah is that we're talking over here about aser wine, yayin nesach, that falls into yayin that's mutter. And also mayim b'mayim. We're learning the whole time that this all applies to wine. That was probably more common, what they would pour for Avoda Zara, but the same would be regarding water. If you have mayim that was poured for Avoda Zara, and it gets mixed with other water, because it's the same min, so here the isra will be b'kol shuhu, even a tiny drop. However, if it's yayin b'mayim, the yayin nesach mixed in water, or a mayim b'yayin, or it's mayim that was aser, got mixed into wine, so here it's not going to be b'kol shuhu. B'noisen tam. Over here it's going to be based on whether it gives a taste or not, which is usually, if there's 60 times more against the isra that fell in, then it would be mutter. So it goes by the taste. So the Mishnah concludes, klal, the rule here is, min b'minai, if the yayin nesach that falls into wine is the same min, so then the isser is even a mashu. But if it's a different min, it's in water, or it's water that was usher into wine, b'nais tam, then it goes by the taste. This is the simple pshat of the Mishnah, but the Gemara begins right away with a statement that was brought in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, which will turn everything on its head. And the pshat of the Mishnah, according to this, will be different. So, Zok the Gemara, Ki asa Rav Dimi, Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Dimi came, and he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that no, when it comes to this, we're very lenient. Hama'ara yayin nesach mechavis l'bar. If you're pouring yayin nesach from a barrel into a pit where there's a bunch of wine in it, that's all permitted wine, afila kol hayom kulay. Even if you're pouring the wine into this pit the entire day, it's not going to be a problem, because rishain bottle. Every drop of wine that you pour in, and there's roiv yayin of heter inside the bayer, it becomes bottle, and then when you continue pouring, it becomes bottle again, and everything that you continue pouring always becomes bottle in the wine that's inside the bayer. And therefore, what this would mean is, even if you're pouring from this barrel the entire day, which ends up meaning that there's more yayin nesach that was mixed into this wine in this pit than the wine that was permitted. But nevertheless, it's all going to be bottle, and it's all going to be permitted to drink. Because what happens is, the yayin nesach that falls into the bar in the beginning becomes all totally mutter. It becomes mutter wine. And now whatever additional yayin nesach you poured in is going to, again, become bottle. So therefore, it can be all day, but it'll still all be mutter. Okay, so obviously, what Rabbi Yochanan here is saying is that we're not going to apply this concept that it's going to be aser with a mashu. So the Gemara right away asks from what it said in the Mishnah. Tanan, what did the Mishnah say? Yayin nesach aser v'oiser b'kol shul. The yayin nesach is aser b'hano, and when it falls into the other wine, it's aser. It asers even with a kol shul. So my lab, don't you think the pshat of the Mishnah is like we learned it when we explained it when you learned the Mishnah? The kanafel isura l'gayat teira. That it's the yayin nesach that's falling into wine that's mutter, like the case Rabbi Yochanan was talking about, a barrel that he's pouring into a pit of permitted wine, and the Mishnah says that it's also even with a mashu. Says the Gemara, loy, that's not the pshat in the Mishnah according to this. Rather, the case is the opposite. The kanafel heteira l'gay yisura. The Mishnah is speaking about a case where it's heter wine that fell into a pit of aser wine. So in such a case, we're actually going to say the exact opposite. That if there's heter wine that falls into the iser wine, so every mashu that falls in becomes aser right away. And even if you're going to pour heter wine into this pit of the aser wine the entire day, So much so that you now know that you have more heter wine that was poured into here than the Isser wine that was there originally. But nevertheless, since the heter wine that goes in, every drop becomes part of the Isser wine and it becomes totally Aser, so as much as you'll pour from the heter wine, it'll never be materit. Exactly like what Rav Dimi said in the name of Rav Yechanan, but in the opposite of his point. Because over here, it's the heter wine that's going into the Isser wine. That is what the Mishnah is talking about. Tashema, but now the Gemara is going to go through now the next few parts of what it said in the Mishnah. The Mishnah goes on to say, and it says the case. If it's yayin, b'mayim, if wine falls into water, so then since it's not the same min, the Mishnah said, b'nais and tam. So the wine will be aser if there's still a taste of this wine in this water. So over here as well, the Gemara asks, "My love, what's the pshat of this case? The kanafel chamer di isura l'mayid dat teira. It's the wine which is aser that's falling into the water which is mutter, and it's saying here that it's not going to become bottle. We're not going to say like Rav Dimi said in the name of Rav Yechanan that it becomes bottle. Every drop becomes bottle, and therefore it's all mutter. No, it actually is not going to become bottle as long as you can feel the taste of the wine. Why is that? It should all be bottle according to Rav Dimi. Says the Gemara over here as well. The pshat is like we said before. Loi, we're not talking about the wine, the yayin nesach that's falling into the water. The kanafel chamer da teira. In this case, even though it's not what's usual, but over here, what the Mishnah is talking about is we're talking about chamer da teira. This is regular wine, mutter wine, and it fell into lemaya de isura, and it fell into the water which is aser. It's the water here actually that was poured for Avoda Zara. So this water is what's aser, and this wine which is mutter falls into this water which is aser. And here's where the Mishnah is saying that it's going to go by the taste. Right, so it has to be talking about, Rashi over here adds, that it's not talking about that it fell one drop at a time, because if it fell one drop at a time, then it wouldn't be going by the benois and tam. There's no reason to say then it goes by the taste. It should just all be bottle. So what's the case over here? That it fell, the chamra, which is heter, fell all at once into this water, which is aser. And over here, you have to see if it still has if the water, which is aser, is giving a taste to this wine. If you feel the water, if it feels watery, if the wine, you feel still the taste of the water in the wine, that's where the Mishnah is saying that it's going to be aser. But if the case would be the opposite, that it's the wine which is aser that falls into the water which is mutter, then Rav Dimi said in the name of Rav Yechanan, in that case we say every drop that falls in becomes mutter. Okay, so now the Gemara goes to the next example the Mishnah gave. So we just explained that when it says in the Mishnah water, what kind of water are we talking about? Dafka, the water, is the one that was poured for Avoda Zara, and the wine is the one that is the mutter wine. If so, what was the next example of the Mishnah? The next example was that the Mishnah says that what happened was that the water fell into wine. So what are we talking about now? You just explained that when it says in the Mishnah the first time water, what kind of a water is it talking about? Water that was poured for Avoda Zara. So then it would seem that Seifa Nami, b'maya d'isura. The next case of the Mishnah is also talking about water which is Aser for Avoda Zara. Now, v'katani Seifa, what's the next example of the Mishnah? That mayim b'yayin, water falls into wine, b'nais and tam, that here as well, because it's two different minin, we see if it's still giving a taste or not. So it would seem, what are we talking about over here? The mayim is the one that's aser, and that mayim that's aser is falling into the wine, which is mutter. And what does it say over here? We have to see if it gives a taste. But according to Rav Dimi, in the name of Rav Yechanan, it doesn't matter. Every drop of water, which is aser, that falls into the wine, becomes bottle. And even if water falls in all day, and it becomes completely diluted with water, it doesn't matter. It all becomes bottle. Why are we saying that it goes by the taste? Rav Dimi, so Rav Dimi says, no. The pshat here in the Mishnah is, don't compare the mayim in the second case to the mayim in the first case. Just because the mayim in the first case was the mayim of Avoda Zara, then the mayim in the second case has to be as well. No, that's not the pshat. The entire Mishnah, according to Rav Dimi, the name of Rav Yechanan, has to be speaking about a case that it's the heter that's falling into the isser. Not the opposite, not the Issa falling into the heter. So Amalach Rav Dimi will tell you, Kula Masnisin, the entire Mishnah is a Teira L'goy Isura. It's the heter that's falling into an Isser. And therefore, Vereisha, the first case of the Mishnah was the Kanafal Chamra da Teira L'may di Isura. That it's the wine which is mutter that's falling into the water which is Aser. And Seifa, in the Seifa where the case is the opposite, what it's talking about is the Kanafal Maya da Teira. Here, it's the water which is mutter, and that is falling into L'chamra di Isura, into the wine which is Aser. But the point remains the same, that the entire Mishnah is all a case of when the heter is what's falling into the Yisr. This is what Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yechon. It's a tremendous kula, that in such a case there's no Yisr. Every drop that falls in becomes batel. Now the Gemara here will bring that there's other opinions, other Amirayim that quoted in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, and they argue with this. Kiyasa Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef am Rabbi Yechanan. When Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef came, and he repeated what Rabbi Yechanan said, so he said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that Hama'ara Yayin Nesach mitzartzor cotton lebar, if a person is pouring Yayin Nesach from a small little jug into a pit of wine, even if he's pouring the entire day, I apply this point that Rav Dimi said, that rishain bottle, that every drop that falls in becomes bottle, and even all day it'll be bottle. But however, v'dafke tzartzor cotton, that's only if it's coming from a small jug where there's a very thin flow of the wine that's aser, that's falling into this pit. It's not a big flow, it's not a big flow of the wine. But if it's a barrel that has a very big flow, then here I will not apply this heter, this kula of Rabbi Yechanan. So this is dafke by a tzartzor cotton. Right, so the Rishonim say that the distinction is when it comes to a barrel. What's usually used to pour into a pit? You pour wine into a pit, you're pouring usually from a barrel into a pit. So over there I say that because it's what's usually poured in and it's a thick flow, the entire thing becomes aser. But if it's a tzartzor cotton, which is not usually used to pour into a pit, so there this thin flow will all become bottle. Every drop that falls in becomes bottle. So he agrees to the concept of what Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, but he limits it, only if it's from a small jug. However, now the Gemara brings that Kiyasa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yechanan, when Ravin came and he repeated what Rabbi Yechanan said, so he said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan a different halacha, where it comes out that Rabbi Yechanan never said this concept, B'chlal. It does not become bottle. We're not going to say that every drop that falls in becomes bottle. Why? Because what did he say in the name of Rabbi Yechanan? Yayin nesach shenafel a, if wine, yayin nesach, falls into a boir, which has permitted wine in it, navanofel sham kitan shomayim, and there's also a kitan shomayim, from a jug of water that fell into this same pit. So in this case, Rabbi Yechanan said, Royin es haheter ki ilu einai. That heter wine that's there, we see it, we look at it as if it's not there at all. And therefore, v'ashar mayim, the rest of the water that fell in that's there, ravin olav, which is more than the yayin nesach that fell in, mevatlin aisai. And therefore, that water that's there will be mevatl this yayin nesach. Okay, so let's explain over here. What's Rashi explains it. What's the chiddush of what Ravin said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan? So the point, first of all, that you see what he's saying in the name of Rabbi Yechanan is, we're not going to say that this yayin nesach that fell into the boir is going to be all aser b'mashu. It's not going to be aser b'mashu. If the yayin nesach falls into the boir where there's again, let me start over again. What did Rav Dimi say? Rav Dimi before said that when the yayin nesach falls into the boir where it's mutter wine, then it all becomes mutter. Every mashu that goes in becomes right away completely mutter. No, Ravin says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that's not the case. Yayin nesach that falls into the boir, which has heter wine, it's all going to become aser, like it says in the simple pshat of our Mishnah. Simple pshat of our Mishnah is saying that when the yayin nesach falls into the heter, it becomes aser right away b'mashu. So now if that's the case, it would seem that all of the wine now in the boir, including the heter wine, becomes part of the iser wine, because now it's all aser. And now if that's the case, if water now falls into this boir, since you have a lot of wine over here that's now aser, because you have the yayin nesach plus the yayin of the heter, which all became aser together with the yayin nesach, so then the water should not be enough to be mevatel the iser of this large amount of wine that's here. Okay, so the chiddush that Ravin is saying is that although it's true that when the yayin nesach falls into the heter, it asers the whole thing, but nevertheless, it doesn't mean that the heter wine itself is like the Isser wine. The yayin nesach is the yayin nesach, and the heter wine is the heter wine. True, the heter wine is going to be aser as well because of the mixture. Yeah, true, there's a mixture here, so it's also going to be aser b'kol shehu. But it's aser because of the mixture, not because of the heter wine itself turns into Isser. It doesn't turn into Isser. The heter wine remains the heter wine, and the Isser wine remains the Isser wine. So therefore now, if water falls into this boir, and you want the yayin nesach to be bottled to the water, so Rayin, what we say is, we see the heter wine as separate. That heter wine is not part of the Isser really. So therefore, to be mevatel this yayin nesach, as long as there's more water than the yayin nesach that fell in, it's going to be mutter. That's the chiddush over here, what Rabbi Yochanan said. This is the concept. The Gemara here is going to discuss this concept of royin. Royin is a heter ki'ilu einoi. That mutter wine, even though it became usher by the mixture, because again, Rabbi Yochanan here disagrees. Ravin, that's quoting Rabbi Yochanan, disagrees with what Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. It does aser b'mashahu, but still that heter wine remains separate. It's not. It doesn't really turn into Isser wine. And therefore, in order to be mevatel this yayin nesach, as long as you have v'hashar mayin ravin olav, more water than this yayin nesach that's inside, mevatel noisai. It could be mevatel this yayin nesach. I ignore the heter wine that's there. He also Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. When Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda came, Rav Yochanan, so he said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Lo yishanu elo shenofel kittul shamayim tchila. When is this going to be the case? Only if this water that fell into this bayer fell in first. So then I say that the water that was there from before will be mevatel the yayin nesach that falls in afterwards, and the heter wine that's there does not combine with the yayin nesach against this water. So the water will be enough to be mevatel the yayin nesach alone that fell in. But if that water that fell into the wine was not there from before, so then what I say is it works the opposite. What happened? First, the yayin nesach fell into the wine of heter, and only later the water fell in. So here I'm going to say matzah minas minoi venir. The yayin nesach that falls into the yayin heter, since they're both the same minim, it wakes it up. That's the simple title of the word nir. That's one pshat. Rashi says you read it as nir, it wakes it up. Or I think there's another, Rashi says here, another pshat, that nir means that noyar. Noyar means that it connects. So it's not the nir, but it's noyar. That these two wines now connect. The Isser wine and the yayin heter both become connected. And once they become connected, what happens is the heter wine becomes transformed into Isser wine. So if the yayin nesach falls into the yayin heter first, and now the entire yayin heter all becomes part of the Isser wine, so now, if the water is going to fall in afterwards, it's not going to be mevatel the yayin nesach, because now you have a much larger amount of yayin that's all considered to be asur. The yayin nesach plus the yayin heter all became together, transformed into yayin isser. It's too late to be mevatel now this yayin nesach with the water that falls in afterwards. Again?
There's nothing to be mevatel. It's all isser.
But now if the water falls in afterwards,
the water is not combining with anything.
Yeah, it's okay. The water, it's much less. Now, there are others that taught this statement that Rav Shmuel by Yehuda said in the name of Rav Yochanan. So they taught Amasnissen. They taught this halacha here on the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? Yayin b'yayin. If it's the same min, if yayin nesach is falling into yayin which is mutter, kolshu, even a tiny drop. So the Mishnah said it'll be aser. So on this, Rav Shmuel by Yehuda, Rav Yochanan. So he explained, when is the Mishnah saying this? When the Mishnah is saying that the yayin nesach will aser, the yayin in the pit, that's mutter. Even with the mashu, that's only because there was no kitun shamayim, there's no water that fell in there as well. Avol nafashom kitun shamayim. If there's water that fell in there as well, then I say, Rayin is a heter ki'ilu einai. The heter that's there, the heter wine that's there, I don't pay attention to that. I don't take that into account there at all. And v'ashar mayim rabin olav, and therefore the yayin nesach, once you remove, you don't take into account the yayin heter, you just look at the yayin nesach that's here in this mixture. So there's more water against this yayin nesach, and it'll be mevatel it. Okay, so again, this is the same point that we said before, that when you have the yayin nesach mixed with the yayin heter, even if it's true that it asers the entire wine, but it doesn't mean that it transforms the yayin heter itself to become yayin nesach. This is the way the Mefarshim explain it. The yayin heter remains really yayin heter, which is only aser because of the mixture. So the yayin nesach is really the only thing that's the problem here. So the water will be materet. Okay, so now the Gemara says, "My ikke bein ledemasnin la masnisin." What's the difference whether this statement that about the water that fell in here, whether this is said on our Mishnah, bein ledemasnin la adarovin, or whether Rav Shmuel by Yehuda said this point in the name of Rav Yochanan in connection to what Ravin said? It seems to be saying the same thing. So the Gemara says, no, it's actually not the same. The one that said that it was said directly on the Mishnah. So according to this, loy boy tchila doesn't make a difference when the water fell in. It's not necessary for the water to fall in first to say that the yayin nesach will be bottled with this water. Even if the water fell in later, we're still going to say that the yayin nesach is separate from the yayin heter, and therefore that yayin nesach alone could be bottled in the water. Meaning, according to this opinion, we're not going to say the svara that the Gemara said before, that it's min b'mino v'neir, that now the yayin nesach and the yayin heter becomes connected as one. We don't say that, according to this opinion. It's going directly on the Mishnah, and Rabbi Yechanan said that as long as water falls in, doesn't matter when, it's going to be bottled with the water. But the one that says that this was said on the statement of Ravin, so then by Tchila, then the whole chiddush of Shmuel bar Yehuda that said this in the name of Rabbi Yechanan is coming to say that it's necessary for the water to fall in first. Because Ravin already said this point in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that when the water falls in, then the water is going to be mevatel the yayin nesach. So what's Shmuel bar Yehuda coming to add? He's coming to add that it's only if the water falls in first. But if the yayin nesach fell in first, so then the two wines, the yayin nesach and the yayin heter, become combined to be one big iser, then the water cannot be mevatel it. Here the Gemara brings other Ameiraim that spoke about this, Rabbi Yechanan, but also Chizkiah that spoke about this. Itmer, we learned the following machlokes: Yayin nesach shenafel lebayir, yayin nesach that falls into a bayir of heter wine, and v'nafel sham kitra shel mayim, and there's also a jug of water that falls into this bayir. Basically, it's similar to the case that we're talking about till now. So Alma Chizkiah says higdilu be'iser, if what was increased here. So this term of higdilu, which means what was increased, means what fell in last. If what fell in last is the thing that's aser, in other words, the yayin nesach fell in last, so then aser. Then this is going to be aser. Okay, so the Gemara will eventually explain that the reason is because Chizkiah does not hold of this point that we're saying till now, this concept that the Gemara calls royin, that we see the yayin heter to be separate of the yayin nesach. He doesn't hold of that concept, and therefore he says if the yayin nesach falls in last, so the yayin nesach combines to the yayin which is aser, and therefore there's not enough water to be mevatlet, so it's going to be aser. However, if igdilu beheter, if what happened over here is that you had yayin nesach that fell into water that was already mevatel the yayin nesach, and then afterwards permitted wine. Heter wine was the last one that increased. That was higdila here means it increased. The last thing that fell in was then heter wine. So then mutter, the whole thing is going to be mutter because the yayin nesach was already bottled from before in the water, and then later the yayin heter falls in. I'm not going to say that now that yayin heter that falls in later is going to combine to the original yayin nesach that was there. The yayin nesach that was there already became mutter with the water that it mixed with. So therefore, the yayin heter that falls in at the end will also be mutter. That's Chizkiah. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, however, Rabbi Yechanan says, Afile higdilu beiser mutter, that even in the case where it's the yayin nesach that fell in the last, it was the last one that increased, it's also going to be mutter. And this is the same point that Rabbi Yechanan said before, that the Gemara quoted before in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that as long as the water was there before, so then what happens is the yayin nesach and the yayin iser never combine with each other, and it's the yayin nesach alone that will become bottled in the water. The yayin heter is not taken into account. We see the yayin heter as a separate thing. So it's only the yayin nesach that will become bottled in the water. That's the pshat in this machlokes here between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yechanan, which the Gemara will explain soon, the maskana. But in between, the Gemara actually suggests a different pshat based on what it says in a different Mishnah. So Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, Leime, shall we say? But then maybe there's a different pshat here in this machlokes of Chizkiah and Rabbi Yechanan. That Chizkiah v'Rabbi Yechanan beplukte the Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan kamiflagi. Their argument is based on the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. The Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, it says Sa'ir shel chulin v'shel truma. If you have the sourdough of chulin and of truma, shenaflu l'toicha isa, they fell into a dough. Now loy bezekadei lachametz v'loy bezekadei lachametz. Not the sourdough of the chulin and not the sourdough of the truma are both sufficient to make this dough rise properly. When it's tarfu v'chimtzu, and now you have the truma and the chulin that together, the sourdough of both of them together combined, and they made the dough rise properly. So now, what's the halacha here? The truma is contributing to the taste and the dough that's rising. Over here, you can't say that the truma is going to be bottle. Usually, truma is bottle with if it's 100 against it. But when it rises and you mamish have the effect and the taste of this truma, it's not going to be bottle. But the thing is, though, it combined together with chulin, though. So Rabbi Eliezer says, you have to look at what fell in last. If they fell in, but not exactly together. But if the truma fell in last, that's the main effect. And therefore I'll say that it's aser. If the chulin fell in last, so then that's the main effect, because that finished the process of it becoming properly, to rise properly, then it'll be mutter. Chachamim say it doesn't matter. Whether the iser, the truma fell in first or last, it won't be aser only if the truma alone has the power to make this dough rise itself properly. If it won't make it rise, only in combination with the chulin it was able to rise, then it's not going to aser it. So the Gemara is thinking now, Rabbi Yirmiyah was thinking that this machlokes, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing on the same point. Because Chizkiah, what was the argument here between Rabbi Yochanan? Regarding the case where the Isser fell in last. Chizkiah said that if Higdilu be'Isser, if the last thing that fell into this pit is the Yayin Nesach, so then it's going to be Aser. Rabbi Yochanan said, even though the Yayin Nesach fell in last, it's still going to be mutter, because there was already a mixture from before, so it's going to be. Rabbi Yochanan says it's going to be mutter. So the way the Gemara understands this now, that it's a machlokes based on what Rabbi Eliezer and Chacham are arguing about. What happens when you have two things that fall in? You have to look. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to look at what fell in last. If the Isser fell in last, that's what's going to be also. That's Chizkiah's opinion as well. The Yayin Nesach fell in last over here. That's the most powerful thing. Therefore, it's going to be Aser. And Rabbi Yochanan holds like the Chachamim, that we don't look at what fell in last. Either way, it's going to be mutter. It's going to be bottled in the water. Says the Gemara V'Tizbere, is it logical to say that the machlokes of Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan is connected to the machlokes in this Mishnah? But V'Hamar Abaye said that the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer here, Loishano Elo Shekodam V'Silikas Iser. When did Rabbi Eliezer say that if the chulin is what fell in last, the chulin sourdough fell in the last, then the truma that was there before will not aser it? That's because the truma fell in, and he removed the truma sourdough, and afterwards the chulin fell in, then it's going to be mutter. But if he did not first take out the iser here, the truma that is, then aser. Even if the chulin is what fell in last, it's still going to be aser. That's how Abaye explained Rabbi Eliezer's opinion here. So if so, Chizkiah the Omar Kaman. Now Chizkiah's opinion is not going to fit according to anybody, because Chizkiah says that if the iser, the wine, the yayin nesach, which is aser, falls in last, it's going to be aser. Who's that going according to? Because according to the way Abaye is explaining, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, it's not enough. You don't look at only over here what fell in last. Once you remove the truma, the only heter over here that you say that you look at what fell in last is only once you remove the truma. But that's not the case over here by Chizkiah. By Chizkiah over here, we're not talking about that the Yayin Nesach falls in last and then you remove something. You didn't remove anything. You didn't remove the Yayin Nesach falls in first and then you remove the Yayin Nesach. That's not the case that we're talking about, Bachlal. So Chizkiah's opinion cannot be like Rabbi Eliezer, and it definitely can't be like the Chachamim. Chachamim say it doesn't matter. Either way, it's always going to be mutter. So Chizkiah that's saying that it's aser, according to whose opinion does he go? So Elo, therefore the Gemara goes back to the point that I already mentioned in the beginning, that really Hacha beroyin kamiflagi. The arguing on this point that we mentioned before, and that's the full lashon the Gemara brought before, that Rabbi Yochanan said about this is, Royin, as is the lashon, Royin is a hetek kilu einai. This concept, when you have Yayin Nesach, that falls into Yayin which is mutter, do I now say that Yayin which is mutter is separate? Yes, it becomes asa because of the mixture, but it's really separate. And therefore I look at that part as if it's not there, or not. Do I say that or not? So the Gemara explains, that's what the argument here is. L'chizkiah les le'royin. Chizkiah does not hold to this concept that the yayin which is mutter, I see it as if it's not there. And therefore in this case, when the yayin nesach falls in the last, that yayin nesach combines with the yayin which is mutter, now it's a large amount of wine, and the mayim is not enough to be mevatalit. It all combines together. However, Rabbi Yochanan says, even though the yayin nesach that fell into the yayin which is mutter, it now combines, there's a mixture here, and it answers the whole thing. But for the din of bittul, though, we don't see it as one thing. The yayin of heter is still considered to be separate. You have to be mevatel only the yayin nesach, and to be mevatel the yayin nesach, for that you have enough water to be mevatel it. That's the argument here. We quoted before, and we're touching here again, that Rabbi Yochanan holds to this concept that when the yayin nesach mixes with the yayin that's mutter, the yayin that's mutter really remains separate as far as the din of bittul is concerned, and you only need water against the yayin nesach. Does Rabbi Yochanan really hold this? But Rabbi Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan a shaila about such a kind of a case. Shnei kaises, you have 2 cups of wine. Echad shel chulin, one's a chulin cup of wine, v'echad shel truma, and another is a truma cup of wine. Umazgan, and they were both diluted with water. And then ve'irvan zeh b'zeh. And then this chulin wine with the truma wine was mixed together. Mahu, what's going to be the halacha in this case? So here, this is really the exact same shaila. Am I going to say that the chulin wine which is in this mixture is really separate? I don't need enough water to be mevatel the wine of truma and chulin combined. True, the whole thing now is a mixture, but the chulin wine is still considered to be separate. I only need enough water against the truma wine which is here. And I have enough water for that to be mevatel the truma wine. Or do I say no, now that the truma and the chulin are mixed together, so I don't say that I see the chulin as separate. I consider it all to be one mixture of isser of truma wine, and therefore I don't have enough water to be mevatel this wine now. This is mamish the shaila. Rabbi Yochanan was asking the shaila, do I see rayin, do I see the heter, the chulin as separate or not? And v'loi pashatle. And Rabbi Yochanan didn't answer this shaila, so I see that this is something that wasn't clear to him. Says the Gemara, meikare loy pashat. In the beginning, this shaila was asked to him, and he did not answer it. Le pashatle, that is. But le b'soif pashatle. But then in the end, he did answer this shaila, and that's why he's saying over here regarding the yayin nesach that falls into the yayin that's mutter. You only need water against the yayin nesach to be mevatel it, and not against the yayin which is mutter. At Menami, we learned that Amar Rab Ami, Amar Rab Yochanan, or V'amrila Amar Rab Asi, Amar Rab Yochanan, he clearly said this, that Beis Kaisis, we have 2 cups of wine, Echad Shel Chulin, V'echad Shel Truma, one is a Chulin, and one is a Truma wine, Mazgan, and you diluted it with water, and then V'irvan Zeh B'zeh, then they got mixed with one another, Royin Es HaHeter Ki'ilu Einai. He clearly said here, this concept again, that the heter, the Chulin wine, I disregard that. Although it's also because of the mixture, but when it comes to the din of bittul, I disregard that. And v'hashar, the rest, which is only the truma wine that's in this mixture, mayim rabban olav, there's enough wine against it, u'mevatel noisa, and it'll be mevatel the truma wine. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, zeh klal min b'minay b'mashahu. When the mixture is in the same min, wine with wine or water with water, then the isser will be with a mashu, shaloi b'minay, but if it's not the same min, then b'nois and tam. Then it's only if it gives a taste, it'll be aser. So here the Gemara brings a machlekes when this applies. Rav Shmuel Damri Tavayu, Rav Shmuel both said, Kol Yisurin Shabbatayra. This is a rule by all Yisurin of Taira, that if it's b'minan, if what fell in, a Isser that fell into the heter, if it's the same kind, then b'mashu. The Isser will be even with a mashu. Shaloi b'minan, if it's not the same min, b'nois and tam. Then the Isser will be only if it gives a taste. Now, when the Mishnah, according to this applies by all the Yisurim of the Torah. So the Mishnah over here concluded, Zeh HaKlal, that this is a rule. La'asuye mai. When it says this rule, what is it coming to add? La'asuye kol Yisurim sh'b'Torah. That's exactly what it's coming to say. That this rule, the chiluk between min b'mina and min b'shein and mina, that by min b'mina it's also even with a mashu, that's by all Yisurim of the Torah. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish Damri Tarvayu. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both say, kol Yisurim sh'b'Torah. When it comes to all other Yisurim in the Torah, bein b'minan, bein shalei b'minan, whether it is the same kind, whether it's a different kind, b'nois and tam. The Isser will only be if there's a taste here. So if it's the same min, you obviously can't look at the actual taste because it's the same min, but that would be by shishin, as we always say regarding the tam, that if it's 60 times more, then it'll be bottle. Now, chutz mitevel v'yayin nesach. The only exception where I say that I'm going to be machmer by min b'mina, that it'll be also with hamashu, is if it's the case of tevel, untithed produce, that falls into a mixture. There it's going to be also with hamashu, if it's min b'mina, and yayin nesach, which the Mishnah is speaking about here. So over here I say b'minon, if it's the same min b'mashu, it'll be also even with a mashu, shaloi b'minon b'nais tam. Not the min, there you go by the taste. Now according to Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish, the zeh klal, when it says in the Mishnah zeh klal, lasuye tevel. The zeh klal is not coming to say that you include all other yisurim in the Torah. It's only coming to say that the same applies to tevel. Now, so the Gemara here brings that this is really a machlekes. We see two braises that said, two braises, one like Rav and Shmuel and one like Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. Tanya Kava say that Rav and Shmuel, and one brais that says like Rav and Shmuel. And Tanya Kava say that Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. And another brais that said like Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. Tanya Kava say that Rav and Shmuel, the brais that says Kol Isurin Shebetayre. This is the rule by every Isur in Tayre. B'minon, it's b'mashu. If it's the same min, it's also with a mashu. Shalei b'minon, it's b'nais and tam. But Tanya, Kava said Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish, and another brayse it said like Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish, Kol Isurin Shebetayre, Bein B'minon, Bein Shalei B'minon, by all Isurin, whether it's the same min, whether or not, it's always b'nais and tam. It always goes by whether there's a taste or shishim. Chutz mitevel v'yayin. Yet v'yayin nesach, that is. Only tevel and yayin nesach are different. Here a machmer, and I say b'minon b'mashu. If it's the same min, then it's also with a mashu, Shalei B'minon, b'nais and tam. Not the same kind, then you go by the taste. This was mentioned before, we learned before, this is a machlokes, Rashi and Tosfos, how we paskin b'poil. Rashi says that we paskin like Rav and Shmuel, that by all Yisurim in the Torah, we're machmer the same like Yayin Nesach. But Tosfos and most Rishonim say that no, by all Yisurim Shabbat we're makel, and it goes just by whether it gives a taste, and it'll be batel b'shishim. Okay, but now here the Gemara explains, why is Tevel in the same category as Yayin Nesach, different than all Yisurim of the Torah? Yayin Nesach, as we learned many times in the Masechta, there's a special chumrah, chacham u'machmer. So they said that the Yayin Nesach will be aser even with a mashu if it's the same min. But Ela Tevel, my timer. Why by Tevel do I say that even with a mashu, if it's the same min, it will be aser? Says the Gemara, the reason is because keheteiroi kachisurai. Just like the heter of untithed produce, how are you mat to this? The heter is, and we're talking here specifically regarding the heter of separating the truma. The heter of separating the truma, you just have to take off a mashu. So too the iser of the mixture of this tevel will also be a mashu. Because the Alma Shmuel said, chita achas, just one kernel of wheat, peteres sakri, could pater the entire pile of wheat that you have. So therefore, Chacham Machmer, that if you don't separate this, the iser should be also with a mashu. And V'Tanya Hachi, and we learned this, or Tananami Hachi, we learned this in a Mishnah as well. It says, when was it said that a mixture of tevel asas, even if it's a tiny drop, that's if it's b'minoi. Only if it's the same min, it asas a drop. Shaloi b'minoi, but if it's not the same min, then b'nais and tam. Then it's going to be asar only if it gives a taste. The same like it is by yayin nesach. So according to Rashi, the point that it's saying over here is, since it's all based on this point, that just like the heter is a mashu, so to chacham or machmer regarding the iser, by the heter, it's also b'mashu only with the same min. You can only separate truma of an entire pile of wheat if it's the same min. You can't separate truma from a different min, from barley to wheat. So since the heter is only by the same min, the iser b'mashu was also only if it's the same min. But if it's a different min, that point doesn't apply. So there, it's going to be b'nais and tam.